Today, we are continuing our exploration of queer love stories. In 2022, you couldn't go anywhere in a major city and not see a poster of two white men with their hands on each other's denim-clad asses. This is because the film we are discussing today, Bros, while it only had a $22 million production budget, had a marketing budget of $33.6 million. The movie, co-written, produced by, and starring Billy Eichner, was a critical success and a box office failure. Bros was, according to Slate, the first gay romantic comedy co-written by and starring a gay man to be backed by a major studio, Universal, and receive a wide theatrical distribution. The film is about Bobby Lieber, who hosts a very successful podcast called The 11th Brick at Stonewall.
Because we all know a butch lesbian or a trans woman of color probably threw the first brick at Stonewall, but it was a cis white gay man who threw the 11th brick.
The movie starts with a wink about its protagonist. The opening bit is him winning an award for Best White Cis Gay Man. While accepting the award, Bobby announces a career shift. He's accepted a position as the director and curator for the upcoming National LGBTQ+ History Museum in Manhattan, which means that his identity is now wrapped up in whether or not he can make enough money for the museum to be a success. For the rest of the film, Bobby will hold anxiety about making the museum both good and financially viable. And we can easily imagine this as an apt metaphor for Eichner's feelings about Bros.
We need to get people to rethink history through a queer prism, not comfort them with another fucking gay wedding, all right? It's a museum, it's not Schitt's Creek.
Oh, I like Schitt's Creek.
I love Schitt's Creek. That show has layers.
Everyone loves Schitt's Creek. Great, okay.
While stressing out about making this museum work, we see Bobby's current social life. He has a group of close friends, including a queer couple that announces they've now become a throuple, and a happy straight couple who are poster children for what good allyship looks like. We see Bobby on dating apps and in sexual situations. And then we see him meet Aaron. Aaron is played by Hallmark Channel movie star and Juilliard grad Luke McFarlane. Bobby immediately diagnoses Aaron as hot and boring, and Aaron doesn't seem super impressed with Bobby either.
What is this? Old school Mariah. How do you not know this?
I'm more of a country guy, you know, like Garth Brooks.
Garth Brooks? Who are you?
And yet, there's kind of a spark, too. The two of them have kind of an awkward courtship.
Why don't you just come upstairs?
I don't really do the whole relationship thing very well.
Relationship? When did I say I wanted to be in a relationship with you?
Do they like each other? Hate each other? We can't really tell. Until they start wrestling and making out in the middle of Central Park. The relationship turns more serious when Aaron comes on a fundraising meeting with Bobby and helps Bobby get a big donation from the amazing Bowen Yang.
$5 million is nothing to rewrite history. I'm in. Wait, really? Yes, yes!
Oh my God, Mr. Grave, thank you!
Of course, congratulations on my money. Happy Pride.
Bobby then shares about his constant too muchness.
I was always too gay, or I was too niche, or, you know, I made people uncomfortable.
And Aaron meets him in his vulnerability, and the two start dating for real. The relationship has hiccups. They try for a foursome, and Bobby doesn't really like it. It turns out an old hockey friend of Aaron's recently came out as gay, and Bobby feels threatened.
I had the biggest crush on him in high school.
Yep, that tracks.
And then the big confrontation happens. Bobby meets Aaron's family, and even Aaron finds Bobby to be too much.
Why did you say that shit about me in front of my parents? I begged you not to embarrass me, but you couldn't help yourself.
They get into a fight, and each of them storms off. Bobby goes to find Aaron and finds him making out with old hockey, newly out friend.
Oh my God, I knew it. I fucking knew it.
Aaron apologizes and apologizes, but the two break up. The night has just hit on too many of Bobby's insecurities.
I've been alone so long, who knows? Maybe that's the only way I know how to be. I don't know.
Bobby spirals after the breakup. He tries steroids to bulk up and become more of the handsome and boring type, but he ends up having a roid rage meltdown at work. He punches a cardboard cutout of Abraham Lincoln and has to be wrestled to the ground. Having hit rock bottom, he apologizes to his work friends. The opening night of the museum is a success, minus one thing. Aaron isn't there. One of Bobby's straight friends convinces Bobby to reach out to Aaron, and Aaron is thrilled to finally hear back from Bobby.
Holy shit, he texted me. Bobby texted me.
What'd he say?
He said, "Hey, what's up?" Hey, what's up?
Fuck yeah, bro. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Great. So, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up?
Aaron runs across the city a la Harry and When Harry Met Sally to show up for Bobby at the gala. Bobby, seeing Aaron across the room, sings a song that he wrote for Aaron.
'Cause love is not love. Our love is real.
And the two hot, white, cis men make out in the middle of the LGBTQ plus museum opening gala. Bobby gets down on one knee and proposes.
I know we're not relationship people, but will you date me for 3 months and then we'll reassess?
And Aaron says yes.
Yes, Bobby Lieber, I will date you for 3 months and then we can reassess.
This isn't just a queer rom-com. It's a movie that knows it's a queer rom-com and is trying to talk about it. The movie is hilarious, charming, and smart. And you can all but feel the pressure Eichner is under to talk to everyone with this movie. The marketing budget has as big of a part in the movie as he does. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
I'm Daniel Schroeder.
And this is Hot and Bothered. Daniel, I'm so excited to talk to you about this movie today, bros. I had never seen it before. Vaguely knew it was kind of controversial and just ate it up. Loved it, had so much fun, and was delighted. What is your history with this movie?
Well, I'm so glad you felt that way because I do think this is a movie for you. And we'll get into that.
No. Let's get into that right now. How is this a movie for me?
I just have a problem with this movie because I think that there are a lot of very keen observations that Billy makes about like a gay man's experience in life. I think that when it gets to the love story it's trying to tell, it kind of loses me because it shifts so quickly back to what I think of as a heterosexual framework. And at the same time, I think that this movie really struggles with attempting to bear the weight of a history it cannot bear because it's trying to be political, but also a love story and also a history lesson. And it fails at all of those because it doesn't commit to one of those for me.
Yeah. I totally hear you. Okay, heterosexual framework for a gay love story. Love this argument. Also, it's an argument that the movie deals with explicitly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that leads beautifully to what does this movie believe about love?
What does this movie believe about love? I mean, I think that this movie believes that everybody deserves love and that queer people have not necessarily seen the opportunities for love in media. And so this is trying to do that. It's trying to show that like love is love. But at the same time, like I think that it's trying to have its cake and eat it too with love, because it wants to like say that queer love is different, but then it places itself in a monogamous relationship, even though they like try non-monogamy for like a minute, but it doesn't ever actually go anywhere besides serving the purpose of reinforcing the monogamous heterosexual style.
I guess the question is, and I think that, I mean, this movie really deals with it explicitly, is monogamy explicitly a heterosexual idea? If there is a queer love story that introduces monogamy, is that inherently a misrepresentation of queer love?
No, I don't think that that's true. I think that monogamy can exist in a queer context, no question. I just think that this movie feels more interested in the conventionality of monogamy. Like it is in conversation with movies like When Harry Met Sally, You've Got Mail, Hallmark movies. These are all very direct heterosexual monogamous stories. And I think that really, to me, highlights what it is trying to be in conversation with and kind of model itself after.
I guess I just think Billy Eichner in this movie is so smart about it. I keep saying Billy Eichner because he was the co-writer and sort of the creator of this. But I do think what Billy Eichner is saying is, unfortunately, queer love has had to be in conversation with straight love because that is the only media that we were fed. And so I am going to queer Hallmark by literally taking a Hallmark actor and making him gay, right? Like the love interest, Aaron, is played by an actor whose like whole career up to playing bros was playing straight men in Hallmark movies.
And he is a gay actor.
He's a gay actor who regularly plays straight men in Hallmark movies. And Billy Eichner is like, I'm going to take this man from this heteronormative Christian hellscape and literally like queer him and allow him to be out. And so I guess whether or not we think it's a good project, I think Billy Eichner, he's doing it on purpose. It's not insidious subtext. It's like, yeah, you guys have constantly made us be in conversation with straightness, right? Like there's a great, in my opinion, monologue where he's like, my voice was constantly compared with straight voices. My personality is constantly being told like, I'm too faggy. I'm too like all of these different things. I'm not bro-y enough. I'm not mask enough. And so I was never going to make it. And that is the thesis of the movie is like, and fuck you. Here I am with my gay sounding voice and all of these things. And I'm going to talk to you, a straight audience, about it. And so I agree with you that that's the project. And I just think he's very in control of that.
I just think that like I have so much more baggage with this movie than you do.
Yeah.
I was also so deep in the conversation of this movie's marketing. Some could see the marketing as really progressive and kind of forcing people to like look at these two men holding each other's butts. But from my perspective, this movie's entire advertising budget felt like it was put towards Billy Eichner yelling at everyone to say, if you don't see this movie, you're a homophobe. This movie is important. This movie matters. This movie is a big deal and it deserves your attention because it's a gay movie, rather than allowing it to stand on its own and make its argument itself and maybe highlight how funny it is or how sexy it is or things like that, rather than trying to shove down my throat that it matters with a capital M.
Yeah. I missed that. I think I was really just like on 7 pilgrimages back to back that summer. And so I like wasn't in America. But I can imagine Billy Eichner yelling at me, telling me that this is an important movie.
And if Billy Eichner had like been doing a Billy on the Street moment doing that, that's great. But like that was not how it played out. And I think that Billy Eichner shines in Billy on the Street. He is so great as a like gay monster dropped into the world and just forcing people to deal with his too muchness, confronting them with his over the topness, running up to strangers and yelling at them is great. And there are moments where the anger works very well for me. I think the moment when he storms back into the museum while like hopped up on steroids to yell about them throwing Abraham Lincoln back in the closet, like that's a brilliant moment of anger because yes, it is self-righteous in all the most deluded ways that gay men can be, but also is making a point while also being like, okay, lesbians, hold them down.
So funny. It's so funny. Fine, I'll put him back in the closet where you want him. And like shoving an actual like paper mache version of Abraham Lincoln back in the closet. Yeah.
And like threatening to like destroy a bust of Pete Buttigieg. Like so funny. But Vanessa, I know that you have a much different reading of this film, and I would love to hear what you think this movie is saying about love.
So I think that this is a very affecting love story. The stakes seem really obvious to me. And setting real emotional stakes in contemporary romance where you're like, I understand why these two people are into each other. I understand what is keeping them apart. I understand what brings them together. I understand what breaks them apart, and I understand how they get back together, I think is just like a really hard thing to do in a New York City rom-com. And this movie hits beat for beat to me of like, this really seems like a couple that is super into each other in an interesting way, that it's really complicated for all sorts of reasons, that they both mess up in a big way. And so I found the love story really affecting. And I think that the argument that it's making about love is that love is really scary because it's really vulnerable and you can get hurt. And I think that that is just like true about dating. I think that is one of the truest things about dating, and that a lot of movies don't talk about it, right? I was just thinking about like Dirty Dancing and Pretty in Pink and all of these just like quintessential love stories that we've watched on this show. You know, Clueless, it's never like, oh my God, it is so scary to like a person so much, right? Billy Eichner says it to his straight female best friend. He's like, I am scared about how much I like this guy. Mm-hmm. I think the unique thing that this movie is saying that is profoundly true is falling in love is absolutely terrifying.
I wholly agree with that. I think that falling in love is terrifying. Yes, terrifying. And couldn't agree more with that.
One of the things that we like to talk about, Daniel, is like, what is the subtext of this movie? What is the thing that the movie doesn't necessarily know that it's saying? I do think that this movie is so knowing. It's like paranoid knowing, right? Like, and I think that that is one of the things that you can't stand about the movie is like, it is trying to fight discourses that it is like, I know you're going to criticize me for this, right? It's like,
it's creating its own straw man.
It is sweating so much on the representation front. You're like, you were slipping and falling in your own rep sweats. But I do think that one of the subtexts of this movie is that just like being alive is a humiliating experience. You are going to try to take a picture of your butt because someone on Grindr is like, no, I really want to see a picture of your ass. And you are going to like nick yourself shaving your butt. And like even the hot Aaron is going to get caught not in a moment that he's hot in the shower, but in the moment that he's jabbing himself with testosterone. Like, I think that this movie just thinks that being alive is so embarrassing. And I go through phases where I'm just like, the humiliation of being alive is beautiful. We all spill. We all trip. We all fall. And then there are other moments, like when I had last week, where I accidentally got hummus in my hair. And I'm like, being alive is too embarrassing, and we should all just live underground. And so I think that this movie truly subtextually is telling us it is like an act of courage to leave the house because it is so humiliating to have a body.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think your reading of the subtext here is spot on. Like, yes, being alive is a nightmare that none of us asked for and has all been forced upon us. So we are just trying to figure it out the best way we can. And one of those ways is by like finding someone to love and attach to and hold on to. And I totally get that. So I can't disagree with you there. But I think that the subtext of this movie is that cis white gay men are the least funny of the queer community. Because I think the funniest scenes in the movie are the roundtables that they're having at the museum, preparing to open the museum. The best laughs I got were from the actress Eve Lindley, who is playing the like young white trans woman at the table who like just makes a joke about Eugene Levy or like makes a joke about Aaron's chin. Those are such funny moments and tiny little observations of gay humor. And like there's another moment where one of the queer black characters at the table basically says like, I'm so angry that if I let even a little bit of it out, I would kill every single one of you. And that is so funny. And also I think highlights the undercurrent of anger in this movie that doesn't necessarily get as touched upon as I think it could have been, but like is so funny. And also like Jim Rash, what a star. He's so funny too. I think that those moments are kind of a reminder of like, hey, cis white gay men are not the center of the gay universe, even if a lot of them will think they are. And we as gay men get our humor from other places in the queer community before we get it from ourselves.
I think that this straddles a line between subtext and text, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the opening of the movie is he is getting an award for being the best gay cis white guy. And so like it is aware that being a gay cis white guy is the most privileged position within the queer community.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think again, it's like whether or not you're like, good job, hat tip, you've acknowledged it, or you're like, I get it, you get it. But I do think the movie is trying and potentially failing to deal with that. I really like the moments. There's something about the boredom of Bobby that I find so interesting. Like the way that he texts on Grindr, he's like, I know how this whole conversation is going to go. Ugh. Like this is just so tedious. It just straddles text and subtext to me, where he's like, there's nothing new for people like me to say.
Right. But I think that where it kind of falls down in that is that those characters are never more than two-dimensional, like, set pieces that he gets to play with as a three-dimensional character.
Totally.
Partially because this is a rom-com at the end of the day. And so it's about like this couple finding love. So we don't have the time or space to give all of these characters fuller lives, but constantly bringing up the cis whiteness highlights that in a way that it thinks it's commenting on it rather than what I think it's doing, which is just kind of signaling that like, hey, we know that these things are a part of the conversation, but that's not the movie we're here to tell. I kind of some ways wish this was a movie that like wasn't trying to tell all of those other things.
Totally. This is a Judd Apatow problem that I have, right? Like he always lets his movies be really shaggy.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it really serves the movie. I like the shagginess of Trainwreck. And especially because it is a movie about a train wreck, the fact that we get like shaggy time to see her be a train wreck, that shagginess serves the movie. And I think that same shagginess potentially doesn't serve this movie. That like part of the brilliance of the movie is how smart it is. And so it potentially being tighter and being more closely focused on the love story and just like believing in the courage of its convictions that the stakes are, we haven't seen queer happy love stories. I'm going to show you one, and like believing in the politics of that. I agree that there's a better version of this movie.
Well, and like that's the text that should be subtext here. There is so much of this movie's like attempt at being in conversation with the history of queerness and the like lack of these love stories that is explicit and would have been so much stronger if made implicit and not hammered over the head. I think that's another reason why I kind of react negatively to it, is because I feel like I'm being bludgeoned with this, as opposed to it being integrated into just the queer experience as I live it and as my friends live it.
And that is absolutely the point that I think that this movie becomes a PSA for straight people, right? Like, we have not had gay love stories. We've probably already had our first gay president. Just because they weren't out doesn't mean they weren't gay. And I do think that this movie takes those times to be like, hey, at the AMC in St. Louis, with you like well-meaning dumb straights. And I keep choosing St. Louis because I lived there for 3 years. And so I'm like, that's me. It's me. Yeah, I think that those are absolutely the moments for well-intended straight people to be like, hey, dum-dums, you've definitely had a gay president.
Well, and I think that problem is so just inherent to the character that has been created in Bobby, because he is this all-star podcaster about gayness, but also he writes these books about gay history, apparently. And also he's the head of this museum, and he's like wearing all of these hats when he should be wearing one hat. Those are not the focus of this movie, and yet this movie focuses on those rather than like, will he find love? And I wish that it had focused more on, will he find love, than will he find love because gay men have never had love before in a public context like this. Don't you see it? Which is how I feel like it's coming across.
I mean, that is truly, truly explicit. And we can talk about that next week as part of the ending, right? It's like, he literally brings children to like learn about gay love.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of things to say about the ending, but I think that like there are a lot of like very well observed things in this movie. I don't want to say that like I think that this movie is an entire failure in every way. And sometimes the things that I react to are like, oh, I feel uncomfortable watching this or don't like this because it's hitting too close. Like all of those Grindr conversations, they make my skin crawl because they are too accurate. It does fall apart when he's taking an ass pic for the first time and he's 40, and it's like, no, he would absolutely have at least 4 of them to send right now, depending on which one he thinks looks best for this person. Like that kind of thing is crazy. But like there are so many of these like little gay experiences that are so true, and that if they had like embraced that rather than also thinking we need teaching moments for straight people, it would have worked even more for me.
And that just, I feel like the subtext that was coming across during those moments was like, we gave a $30 million marketing budget to this movie. And so we have to make sure that we're holding the hands of the people to make sure that we get a good ROI.
Mm-hmm.
Like this just felt like a producer focus group wrote these lines. And I was like, oh, Billy, you probably hate saying this too. Daniel, we always have an emergency stop button. And so I'm going to push it now because I do think that we cannot finish this episode without talking about masculinity, passing as a bro, and drugs.
Yeah.
So let's do that. So, Daniel, this movie has like, I can remember 3 drug moments, but there might be more. But there are 2 sort of like big, quote unquote, drug moments in the movie, as far as I'm concerned, that are really interesting. One is, as I mentioned earlier, Bobby walks in on Aaron doing a testosterone shot. And then the other is that Bobby decides to take steroids in order to bulk up. And the movie talks a lot, like in that monologue that we were talking about, but also in these moments where they're just like talking about each other's bodies. Bobby is like, I have a concave chest. And when Bobby accuses Aaron of being too in his body, he's like, you sure do like looking at my body.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a moment where Bobby has sex with a guy, but puts on like a bro-y voice in order to have sex, right? There's just like a lot of conversation about how far gay men have to go in order to pass, in order to be a certain kind of gay man.
Well, and I think that that's something so wrapped up in Bobby because, like, even when he catches Aaron cheating on him with Aaron's, like, high school friend or whatever, the thing that he jumps to is, I knew that you weren't attracted to me. I knew that you were attracted to that. I knew that you were attracted to the very hot, conventionally attractive hockey player, not me. Yeah. And that, like, there is so much else going on in that scene for Aaron that Bobby can't see because he's so focused on bodily comparison, which is such an issue in the gay community and so prevalent. The conversation about passing is something that this movie is really trying to have so hard. Like, we had that monologue in Provincetown about Bobby always being told he's too gay. And then we cut to Aaron telling him to not be so gay in front of his family. These are, like, real experiences that gay men have and have had and continue to have, trying to pass or play straighter or, like, not be that kind of gay guy.
What I like about the way that this movie handles, like, the testosterone and steroids of it, are that the argument that the movie seems to be making about that are it's complicated, but kind of the movie is non-judgmental, right? Like, the characters are a little defensive about the fact that they are taking certain drugs, and there are subsequent things that happen because people take them, but the movie is not like, and it's wrong and it's bad. It really is like, this is a structural thing that gets, like, played out on the body. And yeah, I like the way that this movie handles that.
Totally. I think, though, what's interesting about you bringing up the conversation around testosterone and steroids is that, like, yes, that is a very prevalent conversation in the gay community. But I think that one place that this movie kind of fails in its conversation around stuff like that is, like, they meet at basically a circuit party. They meet at a party where people would be doing hard drugs, where coke would be happening, where ketamine would be happening. Like, those are the types of spaces where those are happening just casually.
Right. This
is not me arguing for, like, Billy Eichner to talk about doing lines of ketamine and cocaine. Certainly not. But it's just, like, an observation I had watching it, both when I saw it at the time and just recently rewatching it for this, that I was like, yeah, that just feels like that is a moment where it loses my experience. So it's just interesting to me what gets chosen and what gets erased in that conversation.
Totally. It's the PG version of it. I will just say that as someone who straddles love / real fear of Billy Eichner, the idea of him on cocaine is totally terrifying to me.
Oh, 100%.
Daniel, please finish this sentence. You should watch this movie if.
You should watch this movie if you have already seen Fire Island, The Wedding Banquet, the other two, Stress Positions, other movies that I think capture my experience better.
I will say it's so interesting. I was doing a little bit of research. This movie came out just a couple months after Fire Island, that I agree with you. I think Fire Island is a much better movie. And the difference is the marketing budget, right? Like, it was a straight to release on Hulu and it didn't have to pay for rental space in theater, you know, like, and I was just like, oh, dollar for dollar, I can tell you why Fire Island is better. But it is so interesting to me that both of those movies came out at the same time.
So, Vanessa, how about you? You should watch this movie if
you like to laugh.
A few times.
It's such a funny movie. It's so funny. Just the joke making fun of Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan carrying a Christmas tree. Like, that's it. That's it. It's worth the whole movie for that bit.
It's worth the whole movie for the Eugene Levy joke. That one.
Yeah.
I laughed out loud. No. It is worth it for the Ben Stiller joke. Hey, queers. I laughed so hard at that, but we'll get into it in our next discussion.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this movie. And let's talk again next week about the ending.
Can't wait.
So this movie thinks a lot about who the gay community can claim from history. It's wrapped up in this recurring theme that's sometimes played for laughs, this question of whether or not Abraham Lincoln was gay. And that got us thinking about how to think about queer people in history. And so we got Joseph Gamble on the phone. Joseph Gamble is an associate professor of English at the University of Toledo and is the author of Sex Lives, Intimate Infrastructures and Early Modernity, and the editor of The Kinky Renaissance. Let's get Joseph on the phone. Hi, Joseph.
Hi, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for getting on the phone with me.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so this movie, Bros, have you seen Bros?
I saw it in theaters and have not seen it since.
Okay, so let me remind you. One of the ongoing jokes in the movie is, was Abraham Lincoln gay? And it becomes this like farcical, really high stakes thing. But I'm wondering if you can help us think about, how do we think about questions like, was Abraham Lincoln gay?
This is a big issue for scholars of the history of sexuality, right? And basically the issue is before the late 19th century and really into the 20th century, people didn't think of themselves as gay, right? The whole concept of sexual identity was essentially created by these scholars and sexologists and psychiatrists in the late 19th century. And so those of us who study periods earlier than that, including Lincoln, who's really just on the cusp of this, we try to use the terms that they use for themselves, try to understand how they understood themselves. Of course, people of all genders, loved people of all genders, had sex with people of all genders, had really intense emotional attachments to people of all genders. But just as an identity category per se, nobody really before the 20th century would have said, I am gay, or for that matter, I am straight.
Why do we not want to look back and use the categories that we use now on past historical figures?
Yeah, I think that's the key question. And there are two answers to that. It really is about your intention with using those labels, I would say personally. So for scholars, we're really invested in trying to understand the past on its own terms, both so on the one hand, we can respect the real historical difference, respect that people lived in these earlier periods and had different ways of understanding themselves. They lived different sorts of lives in a very different world. And, that lets us both sort of try to do some historical justice to them, but also for us, we can look back in the past and imagine different ways of living, right? If we just impose ourselves on the past, we're just going to keep seeing the same thing.
Yeah, imagine different ways of seeing ourselves, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's the key, really the key stake for people, especially who are not scholars, right? I want people to have more ways of living in the world and imagining themselves and imagining their sexualities, But also, I would say, if you're not a scholar, if you're not working in that particular sort of academic community, it's okay to label people in the past with particular sexual labels like gay or queer or trans for that matter. If you are doing it because you find something in that and you say, hey, it actually really makes me feel something, that I can look at Abraham Lincoln's letters to John Speed and say wow, we had a gay president and here's a gay history. I think that's fine. You just know that it's one way of approaching the past and not, the only way that we could.
The stakes of this within different contexts, I really appreciate you drawing that out, because I do think, right, it can feel really bad to go back and change the identity someone had. I know a tiny bit about bedside conversions that the Catholic Church would do to Jews who lived in Italy in the 19th century. And it's no, you don't get to just claim to change someone's identity retroactively. So I just really appreciate you pointing out that it depends on the context how we look at people in the past, or depends on the lens.
Absolutely, right? And what you're trying to achieve by that. It also depends on the evidence. I think that's one difference between looking back at historical figures and saying, hey, we have all these letters that Abraham Lincoln wrote to his friend, and wow, they're really intensely emotional. That's one thing. And then if you say like, oh, well, their whole life, this person was Jewish, they practiced Judaism, they went to synagogue, and then oops, at the end, they made a different decision. And so now we get to incorporate them, right? There's different levels of evidence there.
Yes, I really appreciate that. So speaking of evidence, do you think it's evidence-based that there come to be these affinity groups around certain people, like Abraham Lincoln, like Walt Whitman, where queer communities will be like, no, that person counts as one of us?
Well, it depends on the person, right? So absolutely,
Yeah.
I think Whitman and Lincoln are great examples of there being quite a bit of historical evidence. There's also a woman in the 18th century named Anne Lister who gets pulled into lesbian and trans history. There was a whole TV show about Lister, Gentleman Jack, I think is what it was called.
Oh,
So
okay.
people might want to check that out. But there are other ways of attaching to historical figures that maybe have, from a historical standpoint, somewhat shakier evidence, but nevertheless, I think are really politically and emotionally important to people. So one of my favorite examples of this that is like actually not a historical fact, but circulates really widely even now, is that there's this sort of like myth that Shakespeare invented the word drag. This gets promulgated in trans zines in the middle of the 20th century into the late 20th century. And then it like makes it onto an episode of RuPaul at one point where they do this whole Shakespeare performance, which was kind of awful, but people should watch it. And Shakespeare did not invent the word drag. Supposedly, it's an acronym for dressed as a girl. People really were not using acronyms in the late 16th century. Like it just wasn't, it wasn't part of the culture. But still, like I kind of love it as this like urban legend that helps people say like, oh wow, I get to claim Shakespeare as like part of genderqueer history. That's great. Go for it.
So going off of this Shakespeare moment, when I was an English major in the early 2000s, I, had to take a Shakespeare class my sophomore year, and we were taught, like, look at the sonnets. Shakespeare was bisexual or gay. How are people thinking about that today? Because apparently I went to college 25 years ago.
Well, I'm delighted that you were an English major. Everyone should be an English major.
Oh my God, yes.
And this is actually a great example of how things diverge a little bit. So on the one hand, that reading of Shakespeare's sonnets as gay really emerges in the late 1980s. There's a very particular book called Such Is My Love by Joseph Piguigny, who is a gay scholar. And, it's this beautiful, really elongated reading of the sonnets where he's like, what were you people doing? Like, clearly he's gay, right? Like, clearly he's gay. And that was super important in the 1980s, right? He's writing in the midst of the AIDS crisis. It really is the beginning of a long history of gay and lesbian criticism of Shakespeare. I would say now, 30 years later and some change, people are less likely to sit down and say Shakespeare was gay or Shakespeare was bisexual. Because I think we inhabit a space of skepticism about what he was on the one hand, like who he desired, who he had sex with potentially, in part because of that sense of there wasn't sexual identity in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. That's actually how I start my course on sexuality in the Renaissance. The very first day with students, I say, surprise, there were no straight people in the Renaissance.
Good for the Renaissance.
Yeah, also no gay people, right? Because there was no sexual identity per se. But yeah, so I think there's like a little bit more of a tendency now to say, maybe this is really not the right word to be using. But on the other hand, it opens up questions of like, what would it let us do if we read Shakespeare's sonnets and instead of trying to determine who he was or what he was doing, what if we asked like, what was it possible to think about sexuality and desire in that period? Is he using different ways of imagining sex and affection and desire than we might use? And how might that help us imagine different ways of living in our world?
So the word infrastructure plays a key role in your book. And I'm wondering, can you tell me what that word means in the context of your work and what you discovered about how people learn to have sex?
Infrastructure, the reason that I turned to that term in the book is what I'm really interested in is like, what are the structures of support that allow people to live the lives that they want to live, right? To live a livable life, you have to have some sort of support system. And sometimes that's, an individual community. Sometimes that's a broader, like societal acceptance of gender variance or sexual variance. Sometimes that's literal infrastructure, like you need roads to get around, right? That kind of thing. But I'm trying to like help us approach the past not by asking like, what did the church think about this, or what did the state think about this, and like what were the laws around sexuality, but to try to say like, okay, how did people imagine their own sex lives? What made those sex lives possible? What did they want? What were the barriers there? And how did they overcome those barriers? Because, people lived lives, they really like made their lives possible, and they had to fight through a lot of different things to make that happen, just as we do today. Some of them are really mundane and some of them are big stakes, but there's a lot of resonance, I think, in the past.
Okay, now you have a couple more minutes to like soapbox tell our listeners the thing that you most want people to know about your area of expertise. What is it?
I would say I just said a lot about like not imposing identity categories onto the past, but I would say I think one of the most important things to understand right now is that actually trans people have existed for a very long time. And there are trans people in the Renaissance, and they were living trans lives, and they were making that possible with very little infrastructure, actually. And so I hope that listeners will take that away and go and look up the Digital Transgender Archive. You can find a lot of materials there about the history of transness that I think are really important. And also Abraham Lincoln was gay.
Joseph, thank you so much for your great scholarship and for just being a delight to talk to.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was fun.
You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. We are a small show, and so we need your support to run. If you can, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. We are a Not Sorry production. Our executive producers are me, Vanessa Zoltan, and Ariana Nettleman. We are edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman. We are distributed by Acast. We want to offer a special thank you today to my great guest co-host, Daniel Schroeder. And thanks as always to our soulmate level patrons. Molly Reilly, who we would chase through an airport to declare our love to. Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for. Lauren Byer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with us in front of the whole summer camp. Avi Lichtenstein, who we would make every person in the kingdom try on a shoe for. Kristen Hall, who we would travel through a time portal to spend the 19th century with. Shiri Yadlin, who we would write a sonnet about and read it in front of the whole class. Delia Rose, who we are majorly, totally, but crazy in love with. Leah Goldberg, who we would carry on our backs as we jump from tree to tree like a little spider monkey. And we have two amazing, new, wonderful soulmates, Russell Tong, whose wedding we would yell, "I object" at in order to run away together, and Emma Greenlee, who we would choreograph an elaborate cheer for. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.